You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 34. This podcast is dedicated to CIRCUS. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this industry. Hey friends, fans, and enemies, I'm Shannon McKenna, and I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. 2018 was a huge year for the Artist Athlete because it's the year that it started. I created, and I can't believe it's only been around for a year. My God, producing this podcast every week, it feels like I've been doing this for 20 years. But I started in March of 2018, and the only reason this podcast is continued to be a weekly free extravaganza for you all out there is thanks to my latest enemy. Now, if you're just tuning into the podcast for the first time, you probably haven't heard my Patreon beg, request, ask, so I'll explain it to you now. I have elected to keep this podcast entirely free as a resource to anybody who wants to access it by allowing people to donate to my cause via the website patreon.com. So, if you go to patreon.com/theartistathlete, you can become a Patreon by donating $1, which would make you one of my fans. If you donate $5 or more, it makes you one of my friends. But if you donate $30 or more, you become one of my enemies. Now, in my opinion, enemies aren't such bad things. They are the people, or sometimes they're objects, inanimate objects, that help you improve. They keep pushing you forward. And so, for everyone who donates $30 or more to the podcast, I personally Skype them up. We have a little chat, and then I allow them to record a 15 to 30 seconds blurb that plays at the end of every single episode. And I'm really excited to introduce to you all my latest enemy. I got to do this in person because I was in Portland to talk to her. Here's a snippet of my chat with Miss Katie Betts. Katie, thanks so much for being a Patreon.
You're welcome.
So Katie and I are sitting here in her living room. Katie, can you tell the people who you are?
I am the director and CEO of Shared Culture Concepts, which is a marketing company. And we are a full-service marketing company, and we specialize in circus and performing arts.
And she's like the reason this podcast exists. Not only a Patreon, but like the person who like puts out the podcast every week. What's your favorite episode?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, I think I already know the answer.
It's Joel.
It's Joel.
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved it so much.
Yeah.
I was riveted. Awesome. I couldn't turn it off. And I was driving somewhere, so I had to like stop and finish the episode before I went into the building.
Oh, man. That's always the dream. Because I remember like when I was little, like listening to NPR or like some of the stories and like sitting in the garage and being like, I don't want to go inside yet.
Wait, you listened to NPR when you were little?
Yeah. My parents are like super liberal, like doctors. Of course I listen to NPR. Actually, being in Portland, I've been so impressed with how many of our Lyft drivers have been listening to like, wait, don't tell me.
I was very happy that they did that because I'm like, this is a good sample of Portland.
Yeah, it was awesome. This is the dream. So yeah, you get to record your 15 to 30 second slot. Are you ready?
Can you hear me sweating?
Can you sweat a little quieter?
No, sorry. Just deal with it.
Katie, thank you for producing this podcast every week. On top of being a Patreon, you have done more for this than pretty much anyone else. So I so appreciate it.
You are very welcome. It is an extreme pleasure for us to do this for you.
If you want to help the podcast grow, you can go to patreon.com/theartistathlete and sign up to donate today. My goal, my hope, my wish, and my dream is that we reach our first goal of $500 a month, which covers all podcast costs by the end of 2018. My guest today is Nathan Price. Nathan has been obsessed with acrobatics since he started in 2005. He met his partner, Isis, in 2008, and they've been working together as a hand-to-hand duo for the past 10 years. They've traveled the globe performing with some of the world's top companies, including Cirque du Soleil and the Seven Fingers. As well as performing, he is incredibly passionate about sharing his knowledge and experience with others, and so he started the company Standing Acrobatics. Through Standing Acrobatics, in-person workshops and classes, and entertaining and educational online instruction, he seeks to improve and enrich the lives and practices of acrobats everywhere. He also created a product called AcroGrip, a new kind of liquid chalk created for skin-on-skin contact that's specially formulated to combat moisture and keep any acrobat's hands, wrists, and feet drier for longer. I'm so thankful for Nathan for coming on the podcast and being interviewed under some pretty unusual circumstances, which he describes at the beginning of our interview. So without further ado, here's my interview with Nathan Price.
Okay, because I'm literally sat in the top floor of this car park with my jacket over. I'm like sat on the floor. The jacket's like over my head. In this like little suburban Illinois car park.
Nathan Redwood Price, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's good to be here, you know?
Do you have any
We found a way to make it.
Oh, yeah, we got it. Do you have any questions before we start?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool.
I'm more than ready to just crack this out.
Yeah, let's do it. So, will you introduce yourself? Just say a little bit in your own words about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Price. I graduated from the Circus School in London in 2011. I've been doing hand-to-hand for close to 10 years. I've performed with Cirque du Soleil, with Seven Fingers, done a bunch of contracts in various different countries. I started Standing Acrobatics, the Instagram account, 2 years ago as kind of it sort of started off as like a little side project and now has grown into something fairly sizable, and that's very exciting. Very similar to your one.
And what made you start Circus?
Oh, man. I was 15, and there was a documentary on English television about parkour, and it was like an hour long. And I watched that, and I said to my mum, I was like, oh, I want to learn how to flip. And none of the gymnastics places would take me because I was too old. And so she found the London Youth Circus at what was then called Circus Space. Yeah, I started it then when I was 15, and it was 15-year-old me and like 8 10-year-old girls for a while. So that was strange. And then I kept kind of moving up through the levels and got more and more invested and more into it. And it just kind of snowballed.
And so where did you do your professional training? You said in London.
Yeah, I did it in Circus Space.
Cool.
What was then called Circus Space and what is now called the National Centre for Circus Arts.
Yeah. I think I've actually been there.
It's a really nice building.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's in Shoreditch?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
When you were there, was it an audition-based school and you went through a whole process?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to how any of the other kind of vocational circus schools work. Is there was an audition that was across 2 days, and then the program is 3 years, and you do all the kind of your discipline, tumbling, handstands, stretching, trampoline, everything else, movement theater, dance, ballet.
And when you auditioned, did you audition as a acro bass?
No, I actually auditioned as I was doing hand balance. I was really obsessed with hand balance until I realized that was a terrible idea.
Why was it a terrible idea?
Well, because I started at 15 and I wasn't like a 4-year-old Ukrainian kid who could train 4 hours a day. I think it's very, very difficult to start handstands or not handstands. It's very difficult to start hand balance late. And as an inflexible 15-year-old who had never really done any sort of gymnastics, I definitely wouldn't have had the sort of career and success I found as a hand-to-hand porter had I chosen to do hand balance instead.
So when in the process did you become a porter? And can you actually explain what a porter is for the audience?
So for hand-to-hand specifically, a porter is the guy or girl underneath. And so you have porter and flyer, or sometimes bass and flyer, depending on which country you're from. And it's sort of my job to throw and then catch Isis, who I throw around.
And did you meet Isis at the school?
Yeah, me and Isis were actually in the same audition at school. And we did our very first, I think I did my first ever hand-to-hand with her at the end of the 2-day audition. Like I had seen her do her little handstand routine audition piece. Now it's like, oh, excuse me, hello, excuse me, do you mind if we do a hand-to-hand together?
I hope you used that voice.
That was my voice when I was 18, yeah.
That's great, yeah. Were you assigned together, or did you make the choice to go together?
No, we made the choice. So
Okay.
ENC and other schools, I think, kind of put pairs together. Circus Space, I think that ENC, you also have your discipline chosen. Also, you're heavily guided into your discipline, whereas Circus, it was very free. The way it worked, I don't know if it still does at Circus Space, is that after the first 2 terms, so you do 2 terms where you're kind of just doing general conditioning and doing a little bit of everything, they ask you what you want to do, and you sort of write down on a piece of paper what you want to do, and you go and you have your meeting and you discuss your options with your head of department, and then you make a decision from there. And I remember, I think I wrote down bungee straps as one of my choices.
Nice.
Because I was like, oh yeah, Allegria, that was cool. I should do that. I think I also put Russian swing. I didn't really think any of these through. Like Circus Space has never and still doesn't have a Russian swing. And I don't know what a one-man Russian swing show would have looked like.
Me either, but that would have been extraordinary. It wouldn't be Russian swing.
I don't know what it would have. Probably definitely wouldn't have been extraordinary, though.
So did you write down on the paper Porter anywhere?
Yeah, so I also wrote down hand-to-hand, as well as all these unrealistic ideas. I also actually put a realistic idea down.
Right
and
on.
yeah, I put hand-to-hand.
And so you and Isis got together and put together your act. Did you have a coach at Circus Space? Because I know there are some programs that kind of loosely have guidance, and then you work on disciplines separately or together. And other programs like ENC are very, very closely guided or coached.
Circus Space, when we were there, was closer to what ENC, that sort of format, the very much coach-led format. We had 4 or 5 coaches over our 3 years, just because there was kind of a high-ish turnover. And we, A, were lucky enough to have some very, very, very good coaches, but B, we had coaches from a lot of different disciplines. So one of our coaches was a women's pair bass who had come to sports acro from tumbling.
Oh,
we
cool.
had Jackie and Juan Carlos, Jackie was an ex-dancer who had retrained as a hand-to-hand flyer, and Juan Carlos was this like crazy Colombian guy from the Colombian National Circus School who just, no matter what injury or sickness you had, was like rum and lime, fix you right up. And then we had Adrian Porter, he did men's artistic. He was actually the coach. He was the Icarian coach on Fire Within, the little Cirque du Soleil documentary about Barakai.
Okay.
He was that guy. We had Senna. Him and his brother did banking in a Mongolian circus troupe, but Senna also did like handstands and swinging trapeze, and it's just the most ridiculous sort of person and acrobat I've ever seen. Like we'd be in acrobatics classes and he would be like, no, not like that. That's shit. Let's do it like this, and just crack out this crazy stuff. So we were very fortunate to have a lot of very good coaches over our 3 years at Circus Space.
Nice. And it sounds like from a lot of different influences or styles of moving and creating work as well.
That was sort of a blessing and a curse, because with hand-to-hand, there are a couple of schools of thought on various parts of the technique. And we had coaches who were from all of those schools. And so our technique for a long time was this kind of mesh of the 5 various ways we were being taught it, until we kind of developed our own style and decided which schools we wanted to pick more heavily for our more.
How long did that take you guys?
Oh, it's still ongoing. So 2014, I would say we really like settled into what our technique is and how it works for us. And so that's after 6 odd years of working together.
I don't know. I always find this with technique, that it's this word that kind of feels like a catch-all, or that there's one right way to have a technique.
I've started to use technique in just like, it's really like a blanket term for like, maybe I'm talking about a trick, maybe I'm talking about a concept, maybe I'm talking about like the sort of your global technique of where your technique comes from and what technique you subscribe to. I think a lot of people hide behind, they're like, oh no, acrobatic, like hand-to-hand's a gray area. Like there's a lot of right ways and wrong ways to do things. Like it's a gray area, and people hide behind that and they say like, oh no, there's multiple right ways to do things. And that's really true. But I think within any technique you look at from any circus discipline or anything, there are elements that are consistent across all of the various schools of thought. And those are the things that become very black and white and become very right or wrong. And then you kind of can pick your gray area. But I think people are too quick to say, well, technique is a gray area.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I feel like I find the opposite.
Oh, yeah?
People are very quick to say, like, this is right and this is wrong, and kind of aren't comfortable living in the gray area. Of course, I come from aerial and not hand-to-hand.
So, because I don't know really anything about aerial, so I can't really comment on the aerial technique. But for hand-to-hand, there are things that I consider to be very black and white.
What are the examples of those things?
So one of the big conversations that people have about hand-to-hand, and that I always get pushback on, is where your hands and elbows should be when you're porting. And my answer is that's where it's gray. It's like, actually, it doesn't really matter, because everyone's position is different depending on the length of your kind of ulnar and radius compared to your humerus and a bunch of other factors. But the thing that should always be consistent, and when you look at it, it is consistent, is your spine should be in a sort of specific, organized, neutral-ish position. And that conversation to me always feels like looking at the symptom and not the disease. So people will see that their hands are in a weird position and they'll focus so much on their hands and what their arms are doing. And actually the problem lies with your spine. And if you organize your spine into the correct position and brace properly, suddenly your hands are in the correct position for you. And so while it's true to say that there is like gray area within where the hands go, and no two people's hand position is really going to look the same, where there is consistency or where there should be consistency is in the spinal position.
When you teach, because you guys do teach, do you and Isis teach together?
Yeah, we do. We do teach together. I sort of tend to teach more by myself. I'm a little more interested in coaching than Isis is, but she's coming around.
Do you primarily teach the porters or the bases, or do you find that your experience as a porter can lend you to helping flyers as well?
I think that's something that recently I've been very aware of, is being aware that my teaching ends up being fairly base-centric. For me, sort of when you look at hand-to-hand and you look at some of the tricks involved, I think I'm about to... Hello.
We have another guest on the podcast.
Yeah, he's just parked. Thank you. So I sort of became very aware that when I teach it could very easily become very base-centric, and I try my hardest to not let that happen. But when you look at sort of where the complexity lies in most of the hand-to-hand things I'm teaching, as you get further and further, as you get more advanced, what the flyer is doing becomes acrobatically more concept. So things like handstand, somersault to handstand, the flyer is incredibly active and doing a lot of work. But in things like cascade or courbette, acrobatically, they're not that complex. It's half a rotation, and you could do them on the floor by yourself. Mm-hmm. Where the complexity lies is in the like speaking specifically for things like cascade, courbette, and any kind of tempo work, the complexity lies in the tempo. And sometimes when I teach, I talk about it in terms of how many joints are moving. So for a cascade, which is where the flyer starts standing up and they get thrown and then they catch in a handstand, really the flyer in the air they break at the hips and the shoulders. And that's really the only joint angle change we see. Whereas when you look at the tempo of what's happening for the base and the flyer, you have hip, knee, ankle, shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, knee, ankle for everyone. And so the complexity in hand-to-hand never really lies in the air. It lies from the ground up.
That's so interesting.
And I feel like I went off on a wild tangent.
No, you did, but it's interesting. I'm thinking about, because when you watch a hand-to-hand act, generally it's the flyer that looks like they're doing most of the movement in the air.
Yeah. Yeah, mate. No, that's the bane of my entire career is that no one's looking at me. Everybody's looking at the flyer.
I want to ask a little bit more about these communication kind of issues because you have a great blog post about it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about you and Isis and how you communicate about the work that you do.
Okay, yeah. Boy, that's a...
Because I've seen, as an aerialist who has no one to yell at except my straps, my lonely straps, I've definitely trained alongside a duo that I just did not want to be in the room with. How do you avoid being that duo?
Oh, I don't know. We've definitely been that duo in the past. Sure. Me and Isis. So to give you the full history of mine and Isis, it's very long and special and unique relationship. We dated for, like most hand-to-hand mixed pairs, we dated for a long time. We were dating for like 2.5 years, and then we broke up. And then we had a period of about 2 years where we kind of hated each other.
And you were working together this whole time?
Yeah, we were still working together this whole time, training together this whole time. And then we sort of transitioned into a much more amicable sort of friendship relationship, and that's where we exist now. But throughout that entire 10-year history, we have bickered and argued so much and have tried across the years sort of various things to help that, most of which I sort of put in that blog. And I don't think I know a single like long-term hand-to-hand pair who don't bicker and argue on some level and who it doesn't get like a little heated between.
I remember hearing of this, I think he's Ukrainian, some coach, and he says that he will only, for hand-to-hand pairs, only if they're related or married will he train them, because he's sick of having these people who will date and then break up romantically, and then all of his work on
is wasted.
Is gone, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think kept you two together professionally, even though you broke up?
Oh, man, that we're both stubborn as donkeys. And it's that, and then partly it's that we broke up right before we got our first contract with the Fingers. And I think that was absolutely a dream job for both of us, and I think our desire to do that outweighed whatever sort of negativity was happening interpersonally between us. And there was a lot of negative interpersonal relationships during that year we did in Berlin with Loft. Mm-hmm. But I think, and I've said this because now I think out of nowhere, I suddenly became the go-to guy for men who break up with their acrobatic partner and need advice. I've had like 6 messages from various people across the US about this. I think it always comes down to like, do you sort of like what you're doing enough to suffer through the other side of it? And I think that's true of everything in circus. You know, like circus is constantly a balance of, am I passionate enough and do I like this enough to suffer through all of this other shit I have to go through?
So true. That's so alarmingly true. That's interesting though that you say like because of this contract you had, you stuck together.
Looking back on it now, like I really think that's true. I think if we were still in London and kind of working freelance fairly irregularly and weren't forced to be in the same room and to train together and to perform together, our story might have gone differently. But I think because this was a dream job for us, we were forced to do 7 shows a week together, we were forced to rehearse together and everything else. Mm-hmm. I think that sort of smoothed out our first year, and without it, the Nathan and Isis story might be very different.
And so now when you're making these business decisions about what contracts to take, how do you guys communicate about that?
Very poorly.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah, you'd think we would have got a handle on it. We have sort of systems in place to help us. Like we have a joint email account that everything goes through, except I tend to be quite shit at using it. And so she'll get mad at me because I sent an email from my personal account and then she didn't know about it. And that's 100% fair enough. And that's my fuck up. But how else do we navigate that minefield?
Talk about like upcoming projects that you want to do or that she wants to do, and
yeah, we kind of look at what's on the horizon and what's coming up, and we'll discuss and try and it ends up just being kind of doing a puzzle together and trying to see how her life and my life fit together to fit into the constraints of whatever contract or job we have coming up. And we've set up things like shared iCloud calendars so that if one of us is away on holiday or away with family or something, we'll put it in the shared calendar so that we can both see and not schedule anything at the same time.
How often do you train now that you're kind of established and you have your number and you have, I presume you have a routine that you do or have tricks that you have your repertoire?
It really depends on the contract and sort of our career for the past 6 years has fairly like clockwork fell into this rhythm of we'll do a contract for a year and a half, we'll do 6 months in London doing freelance work, contract for a year and a half, 6 months in London. And it's been like pretty cyclical for 6 years. And when we're on contract, we tend not to train that much because you're warming up for the show. So that's kind of part of training. We're doing the show. So you're kind of keeping whatever skills are in the show in check. Skills that aren't in the show sort of take a back burner because they're not really giving you any value in that sense. But then when we're in London and we're doing freelance stuff, we train like 3 to 5 times a week for 2 hours each time, I'd say, like hand to hand. And then we'll go to the gym 3-4 times a week.
Are you working on new skills still? Or do you just kind of train to keep fresh?
We're currently on contract with Cirque, so we're doing Crystal. So much of our day is spent sort of doing things to rehearse for the show or maintain the show or work on things specifically for the show. So
yeah, how's that going in Crystal? Are you guys on ice skates?
Yeah, we ice skate.
Did you know how to ice skate before you did the show?
Me and Isis were, so this is like a crazy coincidence. Me and Isis both played roller hockey as kids. Like I started playing ice hockey and then played roller hockey. And we used to play roller hockey in different leagues, but in the same building, like 10 years before we met each other.
What?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
So you both grew up in London?
No, she grew up in sort of southeast of England, like in Kent, and I grew up in London. And this building was the place like all of the roller hockey leagues went to play for some reason. And so we crossed paths without knowing each other or knowing when we were like 12.
Wow, that's super random.
Yeah.
So those skills kind of have crossed over and have helped you with Crystal, because Crystal's all on ice.
Yeah, Crystal's Cirque du Soleil's first show on ice. And I remember 2 years ago, I saw on Facebook that Cirque du Soleil was looking for acrobats who knew how to skate. And I was like, okay, buddy, you're going to get spammed with every video I've ever taken. And me and Isis had actually already started working on like a duo roller skating act a couple months before we saw that posting. So we like sent them everything we had been doing in training and just kind of bombarded them with videos of us skating and training. And I think we had already auditioned for them at that point. So we had been in the database for about 6 months. And then
my follow-up question to that would be, would you recommend other people take the same path if they're looking for a job with Cirque du Soleil?
Learning to skate.
Yes, and more the bombarding with emails.
Oh, I don't know how effective that was. I mean,
right on.
Like anecdotally, it seemed it worked because we bombarded them with emails, and that ended up in a job. So, if you don't know a lot about statistics, then that looks like a pretty solid strategy because it worked 100% of the time.
But correlation does not always equal causation.
Yeah, so if you're interested in working with Cirque, the best thing you can do is just go on the casting portal on the website and put everything in the database. Just upload videos of you doing any skill you have, because every now and again I see them doing casting calls for like really specific things, and they don't know you can do it if it's not in there.
What's the weirdest video you have?
I don't think we put any. There's nothing like too remarkable. I mean, there's remarkable, but nothing too. There's nothing super weird. There's like one video of me and Isis training this roller skating stuff, and I like smacked her head on the floor, but I don't think I put that in there.
No.
It's like a very audible thump.
When you drop her, does she get really mad at you?
Oh boy, she gets mad at me even I don't drop her.
You buy her cookies or something? I had a friend who used to buy chocolate, I think.
No, I don't think I've ever
You
tried
pass that
bribery.
Maybe
No,
that
but-
would improve your communication.
Yeah, that might. I got to get some vegan cookies.
This podcast is brought to you by The Artist Athlete. Did you know that The Artist Athlete is more than just a podcast? It's a growing online resource for students of the aerial arts to deepen their journey to badassery by accessing techniques approved by physical therapists and master coaches in the industry. Our current spotlight is on the fundamentals of aerial alignment, a practical manual for hanging upside down. This online manual is a step-by-step guide. It is complete with photos, videos, and exercises that you can implement immediately to help you gain the strength and awareness you need for an aerial practice that promotes shoulder health and longevity and good posture upright, so you don't walk around like a gorilla. But don't just take my word for it. Here's CIRCUS physical therapist Dr. Jen Crane of Cirque Physio to tell you more.
The fundamentals of aerial alignment is an absolute must-have for every aerialist of every level. I can't even tell you how many shoulder injuries I treat that are a direct result of rushing past the basics and attempt to get a trick too soon. In the manual, Shannon deconstructs the fundamentals, including the correct muscular engagement to safely arrive in these positions and the rationale for why it matters. Of course, in addition to all of these fabulous pearls of wisdom, the book is also ridiculously fun to read. It's been lovingly garnished with the Shannon humor we all know and love.
Thanks, Jen. Cirque Physio is also featured in the book to give scientific insight into why it all works. Pick up your copy today by going to theartistathlete.com and clicking e-manuals. Listeners of the podcast can get a 10% discount by typing in the offer code PODCAST at checkout. Again, that's theartistathlete.com, offer code PODCAST. Now, back to the show. I want to talk a little bit about Standing Acrobatics.
Okay.
Your company?
Yeah,
Thing?
it's a company now. I have a limited liability company in Delaware.
Congratulations.
I know.
Why Delaware?
I'm an adult. Delaware, because when I was kind of Googling around about where to incorporate, Delaware has the most favorable sort of laws and terms towards LLCs, and then also one of the simplest application processes.
Oh.
It also has no state sales tax.
That I did know that about Delaware.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was part of it. Because
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I saw that.
It's the advice that if you have an e-commerce company, you should incorporate into Delaware because there's no sales tax, and because they're favorable towards LLCs and other things. As far as that's my understanding of it after Googling it for a day. Obviously, consult a lawyer rather than a man sat in a car park under a jacket.
On a podcast from a girl who's sitting in a dark room halfway across the country. Delaware LLC. The LLC is Standing Acrobatics.
Yep.
What do you do with Standing Acrobatics?
Standing Acrobatics started as instructional video content. So I was in New York with Queen of the Night, and I dented a bone in my leg and was out for 3 months. And someone asked me during that time, they were like, "Oh, do you want to come and coach for free for us? Do you want to come hang out in our apartment and just help?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, cool." And so from there, I kind of saw how big this kind of recreational acrobatic scene was in the US, and how kind of seriously people were taking it, and how much time and energy and kind of passion people were putting into this activity that it's essentially a very dangerous hobby.
Yeah, it is.
And so, yeah. And then I left New York and we went on the cruise ship, and I was like, oh, I wish there was a way where I could still kind of be involved and teach without having to be physically present. Yeah, and so I was like, oh, why don't I? And I knew everyone in the acro world is kind of on Instagram, and Instagram is a big social media for acrobatics in the US and Europe. And I was like, oh, what if I just start trying to make videos? And so I filmed I moved all the furniture in my bedroom at my mum's house, and I filmed the first one, and kind of just kept trying to think of things I considered important lessons, or things I considered to be like cool acrobatic tricks we did, and just kind of kept posting, and it sort of kept spiraling.
I feel like we just kind of threw some low level shade at, I call it AcroYoga, but I don't know if that's the correct term for what people do.
Well, see, neither do I, really.
Why do you say that it's dangerous, and how do you think that your online videos helped it be less dangerous?
The idea about throwing minor shade is something I'm always very careful to do, because I never want it to appear like I'm talking down.
Right.
Because some of these people who do partner acrobatics as a hobby are better than some of the kids in the circus school in London.
I see this with the Aerialists too.
Yeah, it's like people are hugely passionate, hugely talented, and I never want anyone to feel like I'm talking down to them or being condescending from my ivory circus tower. I still to this day don't really know how to describe it. So my go-to term at the minute is recreational acrobatics, but I sort of used to use AcroYoga as kind of a catch-all term for people doing what's referred to as L-based acrobatics, where the base is lying on their back with their feet in the air so they look like an L. It's sort of one of those nearly like politically correct problems where there's no way to describe it without offending someone. Yeah, so my go-to at the minute is recreational acrobatics.
Okay, so what do you find dangerous about recreational acrobatics?
So the thing that's happened over the last 4 years since I sort of got involved in this is things got dramatically better and at a blisteringly fast pace. And when I first started doing this, the sort of quality of information that was being disseminated and passed around was either very low or sort of categorically wrong. And so one of the things I wanted to do was kind of correct some of these myths or misconceptions I had seen in practice and seen on Instagram that were being touted as fact. Like spotting, for example. Like spotting is something that we were never taught. We were never taught how to spot.
Oh, could you say what spotting is?
Spotting is, there's sort of two types. So spotting is when you're not involved in a trick, but you're helping it either in terms of like you're being there to save the flyer in case something goes wrong. So you're kind of a safety net, or you're doing like a corrective or assistant spotting where you're helping someone complete an exercise. So if like when you do leg lifts, if you have someone helping you get your legs to the straps or to the bar or whatever, that's someone spotting you for leg lifts. Or if you have someone standing underneath you doing a drop on silks, that's someone spotting you from a sort of safety net perspective in case anything goes wrong with the lock and you need catching suddenly.
Right.
And spotting is like one of our key lines of defense. You know, like me and Isis will regularly use spots for tricks that we've done on stage, but that we haven't done in a while and we're like a little shaky about. And it's not a skill we were ever taught, but it's something that if you kind of grow up or spend a lot of time in a highly specialized environment like a circus school, you kind of learn by osmosis. Mm-hmm. But if you're Barry the accountant who's just coming to an acrobatics class straight from work, you don't really know what that is and you don't really know how to do it. And one of the very first things I ever put out was like a sort of like 10-part tutorial on how to spot and what that means and what you should look for and sort of some of the problems I was seeing with how people were spotting at the time, and just trying to sort of illuminate and guide conversation about maybe better practices. The sort of hierarchy of learning for hand-to-hand is like you start in a lunge. Like anytime you're learning a new trick, you'll put on a lunge belt. So you have like a little safety belt that goes around your waist and like 2 ropes that go up through some pulleys, and then someone's on the ground holding those ropes. So if anything goes catastrophically wrong while you're learning this trick, you're completely safe because the guy on the lunge or the girl on the lunge will stop you. There were 2 things that were happening. No one was using lunges, and when they were, no one really knew how to use a lunge. Over the last 4 years, as people have sort of overall level has progressed and people are trying harder and harder things, that knowledge has sort of slowly by osmosis distributed itself through the wider communities, which I think is great. And what people are doing now is far, far safer than what people were doing 4 years ago. Like people would throw corbettes and cascades in the park for the first time on like a brand new person they'd never worked with. And there were a lot of stories of people getting injured and not like low level injuries, but quite serious acute fairly catastrophic injuries that just shouldn't have happened and could have been entirely avoided had we been training in a more suited space.
Did you find, or do you find that this is exclusive to the U.S.? I don't mean the catastrophic injuries. I mean more the, what is the term we agreed on? Recreational acrobatics?
I don't want to say we agreed on it because...
Okay. We didn't agree.
We didn't agree. That's just what we're going for today.
Right. That's our working vocabulary.
Yeah.
For the purposes of this interview. Do you find these populations also in Europe and other places you've been, or is it kind of...
I haven't done too much in Europe, but I think Europe has a much stronger concentration of circus.
Yeah.
Because France has something like 200 youth circuses. Just France. The sort of acro scene in Europe was kind of born out of this Dutch acro idea, and a lot of the people who were kind of at the helm of that Dutch acro were ex-sports acrobats or ex-circus artists. And so they brought with them all of this knowledge that they had learned over many years in circus or sports acro and all the things that they had learned through osmosis. And that didn't really exist in the US. Like the US doesn't have that sort of culture of circus that Europe does.
No. We definitely have a culture of like going out and trying to figure things out and getting really hurt though.
That's right. Isn't that the American?
That's the American way.
The American dream.
It's our God-given right.
But I think that's one of the things I love about America compared to England is that you guys have such a wonderful relationship with failure. And so it's a thing of like in England, if you say you start a business and your business fails, like people in England, the kind of cultural idea of that failure is like, oh, well, he failed. He didn't do a very good job. Whereas in America, I feel like if someone was to do that, they're kind of praised for trying and praised for attacking it and going after it and trying to get it done. And I think that sort of wider cultural attitude led to this thing of people trying shit in the park, just throwing mad skills.
Yeah. But, and what do you find, aside from obviously yourself, what do you think has contributed to the level of safety going up so rapidly?
I think one of the things that people did very well was, and sort of because of Facebook, there were a lot of conversations that happened sort of I remember like 2014 to 2016, I feel like I couldn't open Facebook without seeing one of these conversations or being invited to chime in on one of these conversations. And people were actively sort of looking at how to train safer and how to do this better. I think on a very sort of basic level, like you can't, if you're hugely passionate about acrobatics and about doing what these people are doing, you can't do that if you're injured. So maybe on some sort of selfish level, it was like, well, I should probably learn to train safer so that I can keep doing it. I wouldn't say that's selfish, actually. That's probably just smart.
Yeah, especially in a duo.
Yeah. But I think people's willingness to have a conversation about it and to be open to some asshole English guy telling them that what they were doing was like a little sketchy.
Well, you do also sound very smart to us.
Yeah, that does help. I don't think I would have been half as sort of without the accent. Like I'm not even English. I just put it on because it gives me a...
Brilliant. It's part of your brand.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great. I totally believe everything you're saying.
Oh, so. Beautiful. Perfect.
Yeah, it's good. I'm interested. You talk a lot about technique as a function, and I'm wondering how much you and ISIS on one hand, and then as Standing Acrobatics, you address the creative side of movement or the performative side, because that's something I also see in these more recreational acrobatics is there's less an attention to aesthetic.
Yeah, and I think
I asked like 12 questions.
Partly it depends on the person's goal. And for a long time, people were just very happy to be doing acrobatics, and that was very fun for them, and they were enjoying that. And then recently I've seen people wanting to shift into creating their own creating their own material and content and into creating an act. And by the time this podcast comes out, there will be a fairly long blog post entitled "So You Want to Be a Performer?" Because I think there is that shift happening, whereas people are reaching a point where they're kind of proud of what they're doing, quite rightly, and they want to show it off and they want to put it together and make an act. We've actually done a couple workshops sort of aimed at this. We trialed this workshop idea called Creating Creative Acrobatics, where we took people through a series of kind of improv exercises and games that we had learned from the fingers. And then through this sort of process that we created specifically for this, like it's not anything we used, but when we looked back on our material, you could kind of see that structure in it, but we needed something more structured to teach it into a class. And so we had these sort of rule sets that we would ask people to create, to improv movement based on.
Oh, interesting. So
and
what's
then,
an example of a rule set?
So the very first one is continuation of momentum. So we would just ask people to pick one thing that they remembered that they did in one of the improv exercises, and then pick that thing, and that's your starting point. And then from there, just see what happens if you continue the momentum of that thing you've already done. And so you just sort of layer improv on top of improv and rule set on top of rule set. And then we encourage people to kind of pick a point in your sequence and jam something in the middle of it and see how it affects it. Or you can keep going kind of chronologically and you just add and add and add and add and add. And this workshop was great, actually. And by the end of it, some people had like minute and a half long sequences of really interesting, unique material. And then in St. Pete, over one of the tour breaks from Cirque, I did like a completely free workshop where we did like half the weekend was like high level technical training, and then the other half was more of these kind of exercises with a little show. So people were encouraged to pay what they can for the workshop, and then people were also encouraged to perform. And if they had an act, they could perform. And then the money that people paid for the workshop was split amongst the performers, because of course I believe you should be paid if you're performing. That was such an amazing weekend, actually, and probably one of my favorite workshops we've ever done. And I like nearly cried in this thing, because I always feel so privileged and so lucky to be able to do kind of what I love for work. And not only do I get to kind of go on stage and share that with an audience, but then I also get the opportunity to go and teach and kind of share that passion with a ton of other people who are just as passionate, if not more so, about it than me. And that whole workshop I really wanted to kind of give back to people who were hoping to kind of look at performing or become performers, because I think that's a really difficult journey to start down. And there's not a lot of resources out there, and it's not as simple as learning a trick. Like learning a trick is a very binary experience. Like I either did the trick or I didn't. Whereas when you start moving into performing and into trying that, it's very gray and it's very sort of ethereal and very hard to tie down.
We're kind of heading toward the end of the interview, so you can get out of your stairwell. I wanted you to give you an opportunity to plug AcroGrip, though.
Oh, man.
Product.
Yeah. Thank you.
Super cool. Yeah, of course.
AcroGrip is the world's first liquid chalk designed specifically for skin on skin. So it's sort of designed for acrobats, aerialists, cheerleaders, and anyone who engages in a skin on skin activity where grip is paramount and resisting sweat or moisture is equally as paramount. And I developed it over like 8 months, just blending chalk in a blender in various hotel rooms across America. And then taking it. Did
you use the same blender each time, or did you destroy different blenders?
No. I bought a blender. Like I went to like a grocery store in Canada and bought a blender to take with me on tour. And then I would like take these concoctions into work, and I'd be like, "Hey guys, can you use this?" Yeah, so I'd take these concoctions into work, and I'd be like, "Hey guys, can you use this? Tell me what you think." And they'd give me feedback, and I'd be like, "Okay, cool." And then part of me feels like I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, because they would give me feedback and I'd be like, okay, I think it's this ingredient that should be more or less that's doing that. And I'd go back and I'd fiddle with the formula and then bring it in the next day. And we did that for kind of 8 months solid before I found one that I was like, okay, this is better than anything I've ever used.
Nice. And then you packaged it up and you're selling it
Yeah,
on the website?
selling it on the website, www.acrogrip.com.
Did you have to pass any kind of I guess not FDA because you don't eat it, but any kind of regulations or anything like that to sell it?
In the Googling I did, no.
Right on.
If anyone's listening to this and they're like, Nathan, you absolutely should have done, please email me so that I don't get sued. I called about 200 manufacturers before I found one who sort of had the facilities to do it, because one of the main ingredients is rubbing alcohol, and that's flammable in high enough quantities, and that was apparently a risk for some people, and they didn't want to manufacture that. But I found this one guy, and he was amazing, actually. He was very, very helpful through the whole process, and he helped me refine the formula a little better, and what he sent back to me was just amazing. And I was so grateful for his help across the process. But he never once told me I should get any sort of documentation or approval, so I think I'm in the clear.
Yeah, no, I think you're fine. And it's a great product, so people should check it out.
Yeah, it's in 2 Cirque du Soleil shows. It's in a finger show. Some artists on El Waz are using it.
And then my final question, which I ask all of my guests, is what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
The beginning? What point in my career?
Yeah, you can define that.
Okay.
If you want to say when you graduated from the school, if you had a time machine and you could bloop, bloop, bloop in a date that you pick as the beginning of your career, and you get in the time machine and then you show up and there's other Nathan, and then you don't worry about all the weird time-space continuum
nonsense. Okay,
yeah. Don't worry about all that. Just what would you say to yourself at that point?
I think I would go back to the start of circus school. So when I was 18, and I always worked hard physically. I was very good I would condition all the time, and I would weightlift, and we would train very hard. But one thing I would encourage my past self to do is to in circus school, you do all these kind of movement and theater exercises, and there's a certain level I had a certain level of hesitancy and embarrassment, because I didn't want to look stupid, or I didn't want to not look cool, and I wanted to do these exercises well. And my advice would just be fuck that, and just go all in, because when you lose that inhibition, that's when you start to do really interesting things. And I think when you're kind of censoring yourself and stopping yourself from taking risks and doing things, taking risks artistically, not physically, that's when really interesting material comes out.
Do you think you've found ways to stop inhibiting yourself since then?
Yeah, absolutely. We in the Cirque du Soleil audition in 2015, there was, of course, theater and movement exercises, and that was probably the first time where I really felt like I was able to just give these exercises my all and kind of not worry about it. And I remember coming out of that audition and saying to Isis, okay, I think I'm now in a place where I'm mature enough to do circus school. And this was 5 years after we'd graduated.
Yeah, sure. Huh, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to lock yourself in a stairwell.
Hey, no worries. Thank you. I only look like a complete nutter to 4 people, so...
Yeah, no.
It's pretty on point.
Totally audio. So
you're
good.
Thank you very much. That was fun.
Bye, Nathan.
See ya.
That was my interview with Nathan Price. Lots of good stuff in this interview, lots of stuff that'll probably get me in trouble with somebody somewhere in the world. But there was one thing that I wanted to clarify, and that was this idea of when quote-unquote technique is a gray area and when it is black and white. And I think Nathan gave a really great example of this when he talked about where a base's wrists and arms are versus where their spine is. So if we look at technique from the outside or the distal regions of the body in, it can seem kind of like a gray area, right? Like someone's arms or someone's wrists might be one place while they're porting. But what Nathan is talking about is the way that the spine is stacked or aligned to create stability and structure is actually pretty black and white. And because he's been coaching for a while, because he's been training and performing for years and years and years, he can kind of get to the root issue or the more proximal or center of the technique. And I think about this a lot in aerial arts as well, that there are different ways to talk about approaching technique. Like I kind of joke, there's more than one way to skin a cat. But there are also some biomechanical truths that any good coach, any good performer, any good artist can look at and correct on a person. So we can talk about technique as just the way you do a thing, and that can live in a gray area. Or we can talk about technique as the most efficient, progressive, and safe way to execute a skill. And in that case, it is very black and white. And I have so much respect for Nathan for putting out so much great educational material out there for the recreational acrobatic community. And I know I have said this before on the podcast, but I want to say it again because I think Nathan brought up a really, really great point when he started to talk about the recreational acrobatic community. And that is that when we refer to something as recreational, that's not a judgment call. That's not to say that the people who practice acrobatics at a recreational level are less than or incapable or in some way not as valid as those who are getting our paychecks from either performing or coaching or full-time circus activities. Nathan said, and I really loved this, that some of the people he's seen who just do this for fun recreationally are actually at a higher technical level than some of the performers or some of the people that he's seen in the professional schools. And I've witnessed this with aerialists as well. I have seen some really incredible artist athletes who hang in the air just for the fun of it, but could easily go toe-to-toe with some of the professionals who I've also had the pleasure to work alongside. And to further that point, just as a recreational acrobat could be at the same technical level as a professional acrobat, recreational acrobats should also seek to practice or train with the same approach to safety and same respect for the work that a professional would. Just because it's not your job doesn't mean that you can't encounter some of the same dangers as the people on stage. And again, as I've said before, education helps mitigate risk. So the people out there who are spreading the good word, like Nathan from Standing Acrobatics or like Jen Crane from Cirque Physio, are definitely amazing resources that you can pull from to help you in your practice. To learn more from Nathan and his partner Isis, you can go to their blog, standingacrobatics.com. And that's also where you can pick up AcroGrip, which is the liquid chalk that Nathan developed, especially for acrobats. And it does work for duos in the air as well, or trapeze artists or aerial hoop lyra artists. I know that people listening always use liquid chalk, and this is a great product developed by acrobats, for acrobats, used by some of the biggest companies in the world. So, AcroGrip's that. What else? Oh, yeah, you can follow Nathan on Instagram at Standing Acrobatics. And as always, you can find me online at theartistathlete.com. On Instagram, I'm at @the_artist_athlete, and on Facebook at The Artist Athlete. This is the final episode of 2018. I will be taking a 2-week break from producing episodes for the general public. If you are a Patreon, I'm going to do a couple of little fun holiday episodes for the next 2 weeks that will appear only on the Patreon RSS feed, so you guys will get emails about that. For everyone else, I hope you have an amazing rest of your December, and I will talk at you next year. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, I'm Katie Betts, and I'm the director of Shared Culture Concepts, which is a full-service marketing company for circus and performing arts. You can visit our website at www.sharedcultureconcepts.com. On the website, you can find a copy of our ebook, which covers basics of marketing, specifically for circus educators, coaches, studio owners, and circus artists.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete Podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and rope by night. I really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.